How you doing, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Daily Hologram. It's your host, Josiah Manuel Salina, and I'm going to be bringing you another classic, to me, music album review, and that's going to be of Exit Lights by Falling Up. This came at a very early stage in Falling Up's career. They only had released two label albums up to this point, which were Crashings and Dawn Escapes. And this was their remix project to keep the fans happy until the next release, because prior to that they released those two prior albums quite quickly. So I guess feeding the fan frenzy while they're waiting for the next coming album, Captiva. But at this breaking point, some people who I don't agree with were thinking that um, the band may have been losing creativity or not original or maybe living in Linkin Park's shadow. This is the album that kind of silenced that a little bit to an extent in what I think is an album way ahead of its time musically and was less of a trend follower and more of a trendsetter at that time. If this album came out today, it would be considered a trend follower, but by no means then. This is a 2006 album, and it sounds just as fresh now as it was then. So, beginning with the new song on the track, because the other two new tracks on the album are just instrumentals, but the new song entirely, Islander. This is a really cleverly written song. You definitely get that isolation feel that it lives up to in as described in the title, and it just allows you to feel the sentiment of that moment of what it's like to feel isolated, and it's a really metaphorical song that is a really just interesting listen. Number two, track number two, I should say, Exit Calypsan Into the Ice Cave, the remix to Exit Calypsan Only in My Dreams from Dawn Escapes. By the way, all these remixes are not labeled like something mix or something remix. They're like subtitles, which I find pretty interesting for a remix project. So basically, this version is a very like techno based rock feel with a little bit of new metal. Um, it is really finely produced. I mean, it was an interesting choice when they decided to put this version on their greatest hits record instead of the other version. I don't know if it was them or the label who decided to do that. But this is a really fun take on the original, maybe even superseding the original in my book. Number three, Escalate to Ceramic. This is the most pop slash hip hoppy sounding track on the album. Very synth based. Sounds like some average thing you'd hear on the radio, but I'll consider it one of the weaker tracks on the album. I don't think it tops the original because the original had like a this really nice guitar riff that felt like it was catching up with itself, but at the same time staying in beat and in tune with the rest of the song. So I don't find it as enjoyable as the original, but still a pretty nice okay take. Number four, Broken Heart Ghost of Seaside. This is a very spooky take in the intro, but then builds up into a very easy listening dance drum bass beat for the rest of the song. And taking pretty much most of the elements of the original without the hardcore guitar riffs, basically. And it's a really smooth listen. It's a take on one of their biggest songs to date. And if you're a diehard fan of the song, I encourage you to check it out. You may not like it as much as the original, but I think this is just as good as the original, if not better. Albeit pretty extended because the original is 3 minutes, this version is 6 minutes. Alright, so the first new instrumental, Circle Winds, track number five. Both instrumentals on this album, we'll get to the next one later, are very spooky. They almost sound like they were scored for like a thriller or a horror movie. It may appeal to some, may feel out of place on the album to others. I'll leave it up for you guys to decide when you go listen to it. Number six, Moonlit Neon Predator, featuring Soul Glow Activator, the nickname for Solomon Olds, former frontman for Family Force 5, turned producer. Uh, they do add a nice flavor to this. It's almost like, how would I say? I feel like this song would fit perfectly in like a Austin Powers soundtrack. But I talk about this version, but then with like a more rocky, heavier edge, to meet with like some Japanese pop, K-pop sounding beats. It's a really interesting blend that is going to be a turn off for some, but a turn on for others. But I would encourage you checking this version out. Number 7, Bittersweet, A Jedi Force. This sounds like the soundtrack to a sci-fi horror movie, or like a mad scientist in a lab that something creepy is about to come out. I don't prefer this over the original, not by even a mile. But if you're into that sort of genre, like I just explained, this might be an interesting remix to you, albeit not a lot of words, mostly instrumental. But yeah, can't touch the original in my book. Third Lake Interlude, track number 8. Again, going for that very somber, um, like horror metaphorical vibe. Almost like something's creeping up the stairs while you're listening to it, or like a very dry atmospheric horror. It's an okay listen, but can be forgettable for some, memorable for others. Number 9, Searchlight's Indoor Soccer. I don't, again, some of these titles with the non sequiturness of the day of that time period. Very interesting to look back on and hilarious in some points. This is a really fun pop rock song and probably was a future trendsetter for a lot of pop rock songs to come. Number 10, Fearless, 250, and Dark Stars. This is a remix I will always remember for the rest of my life because it's a remix that does not include a single verse or chorus from its original. It's completely rewritten. So it sounds like a brand new song, albeit the keys might fall in line with some of the guitar's melodies on the original. But Trevor McNeven is responsible for this remix, and boy, even though this remix goes all over the place and may sound like a hot mess to some, I find this one of the best songs in Falling Up's collection. Number 11, Contact Complexus. This song, you have to be in the mood for it. It's not the most technically advanced melodically, but production-wise, it's a really interesting listen. Great work by my man Ted T, one of my favorite producers of all time, which he also produced Exit Calypso and Into the Ice Cave on this, and I think a couple of others things he helped with on this album. Number 12, Exhibition E Poison. This was a surprise feature for me. Well, sort of a half surprise because, well, first of all, I didn't expect Rachel Lampa to do a collaboration with Falling Up, but I knew Rachel Lampa had said in an interview that she was going through a skater rock phase, which I find so amazing for a pop artist, especially a vocalist who you can put in the categories of like a Mariah Carey or a Celine Dion, or even an Ariana Grande. But for her to be actually featured on a rock song and not actually just going through a skater rock phase was pretty amazing. This again may sound like an extended or hot mess to some. Not really even extended. It's just that the intro was really long, even though it's a 3-minute song. But by the time Rachel Lampa's vocals come in, it's magic on this album. Jesse Raborti, the frontman of Falling Up, did this remix, and he shows potential for great remixing production, just like he does on a lot of his. Even though his original tracks are far greater, he put his own song at risk, and the risk pays off in some points. And I don't blame him for what he did. He did an amazing job. Finally, 13, Cascades from In the Forest Cascadia. That's a mouthful. It's a little redundant too. This is probably the most heaviest rock song on this project. It kind of doesn't fall in line with the rest of the album on a production hybrid scale. But at the same time, it's a nice alternative take, I would say, to the original, even though I prefer the original because of its more blend of piano melodies with rock. This one's sort of straight up rock, almost sounds like a lawnmower in the beginning that leads you into a very rock bass for the rest of raw effect for the rest of the song. But well produced. I can't say it's the most memorable track in Falling Up's collection, but interesting way to close the album, but kind of feels out of place, like it betrayed the sound of the rest of the album. Anyhow, that was my review of Exit Lights. Make sure to check this out. It's one of my favorite rock albums of all time. Very experimental, very ahead of its time. If you relate it to today's standards, you think it's following every trend that rock has ever known. But if you base it on the year it came out, which is 2006, you think it's way ahead of its time and a possible stroke of genius. Check it out. God bless. Take care. Hope everyone's staying safe.